Good morning, everyone, and a very warm welcome to the first event of the LSE German Society in this academic year. And this time we are very proud to host it together with the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung, who have helped us organizing a fantastic speaker today. And yeah, we would like to extend our gratitude from the LSE German Society to both Dr. Norbert Röttgen and highly esteemed academic chair Peter Trubowitz for being here today, and to all of you, yeah, for being in the audience today. We have a great mix of students and yeah, people from external organizations, so it's great to welcome you all here today. But for now, I'd like to express our appreciation to the Konrad Adenauer Stiftung for their partnership in bringing this event to life. It would have not been possible without you, and it is my pleasure to introduce to you Dr. Canan Atilgan, who chairs the Foundation's UK operations. So Canan, thank you so much for being here today, and without further ado, the floor is yours.
Yeah, thank you. A very warm welcome also from my side to what I'm sure will be a very fascinating discussion here. Thank you, Nick, and your team, the LSE German Society, for joining hands with us. And thank you all for being here this morning. It's fantastic to see a packed room, but of course we are not surprised given the relevance of today's topic and guest. Honestly, I don't think we could have planned this event at a more pivotal time. I mean, obviously, just this last week has been overwhelming with Trump's resounding return to power in the US, and then the collapse of the German coalition government the same day. But these are obviously latest signals of how quickly major political shifts can happen. And I think these are also very powerful indications that Europe urgently needs to take care of its own security and democracy. So I think there is much to talk about the current state of play in Europe, in the transatlantic relations and beyond. And we are very happy to have Norbert Röttgen with us. First of all, thank you that you made it to London during, I think, what must be very busy times in Berlin. So Norbert Röttgen is a prominent figure in the German political landscape, a long-standing member of the German Bundestag, of the Foreign Affairs Committee. He has held also key positions in government, and I think most importantly, he's not only speaking about important critical developments, he's also writing about them. And his new book with the title Democracy and War, I think could not be more timely. So we look forward to hear from you about this. And then thank you, Peter Trubowitz, Professor Peter Trubowitz, who will be chairing and leading the discussion. And I think he will be able to bring many challenging thoughts to the table. So with this, I would like to hand over to you, Peter, to take it from here.
Great, thank you, Jeanette. So it's wonderful to be here. A very warm welcome from LSE. This is terrific. It's great to see an audience like this. This happened very quickly. The German Society is known for its ability to mobilize folks fast. I've done a number of events with the German Society, the LSE German Society over time. It's terrific. Let me just say the running order here is we've got about an hour, a little over an hour to work with. So Norbert is going to start with a reading from his book to maybe, I guess, set the landscape, the stage a little bit. And then we'll move to discussion. We will probably start with the 800-pound gorilla in the room, Donald Trump, and implications for Germany and for European security more generally. And then after some back and forth between the two of us, we will open it up, and I will do my level best to get as many of you in as possible. So with that, a warm welcome again to LSE, and please share some of your book with us.
Thank you very much for the kind introduction. Good morning to everybody. Thank you for being here. Frau Attilan mentioned that I'm not only speaking but also writing, but the reason and the aim why I'm writing is to speak about what I've written. So to have you here is just why I've written this book. I think it's not only about political decision taking of governments, of parliaments, but there is the West, I would say. We are at the crossroads, and we as societies, we have to decide, and decisions take deliberation and discussion, and so I'm really grateful for you being here. Thank you very much. I will read from the introduction, which does not cover any and all of the topics, but quite some of them. And then we will have a conversation and a debate. The territorial war of past centuries returned to Europe on 24 February 2022. The longest period of peace in European history has come to an end. The battlefield of this war is Ukraine, the country against which Russia under Putin is waging a war of annihilation that is contemptuous of everything and everyone. Since this war began, the discussion about its implications for the security of Europe as a whole has been uninterrupted, passionate, and controversial. I consider this war and whether we will succeed in defeating and banishing it from Europe again to be at the core of our continent's destiny. In this respect, one of my reasons for writing this book was the analysis and criticism that neither German nor Western politics in general have internalized this historical fateful significance, let alone done justice so far. However, the real theme and thus the decisive motive for this book is to trace the conflicts of our era, which also include the Middle East conflict, not in isolation as a security issue of foreign policy, but as an existential challenge to our democracy. War as an issue for our democracy in turn gains its political significance and topicality from a very particular circumstance, the crisis of Western democracy. The characteristics of this crisis differ in their external shape according to the historical, cultural, and political characteristics of the individual countries. However, they show remarkable structural parallels. The political center is eroding, new extreme parties are on the rise, existing parties are becoming radicalized, opinions are turning into identities and truth that do not tolerate deviation. The willingness and insight to compromise give way to the irreconcilable and increasingly hateful antagonism that only knows victory or defeat. Yet the crisis of Western democracy is by no means limited to these phenomena. We live in an age of technological disruptions, geopolitical erosion of order, and the man-made threat to humanity's livelihood due to climate change. For many people, this is concomitant with a drastic loss of security and personal status quo, which is enunciated quite differently in openly democratic societies than in autocratic repressive systems. The immense pressure of these problems, which affects people tangibly and personally, means that the demands of political competence, leadership, and the ability of parties and politicians to interact in democracies have never been as high as they are today. As justified as these claims may be, the parties and their personnel are overwhelmed by the need to adapt intellectually and functionally to radical changes. many citizens no longer feel represented to a lack of problem-solving skills. This failure of representation weakens the democratic system at a time when it needs to be highly efficient. The more severe, hateful, and unyielding the political debate becomes, the fewer wise and responsible minds will aspire to enter politics to address this failure through competence and empathy. A vicious circle comes into play, which populists know how to use to their advantage with supposedly simple solutions. How can the democratic West prevail? How can the democratic West prevail in the world against war and global threats when Western democracy is under such pressure at home? What is the correlation between the threats in the foreign security situation on the one hand and public attitudes and reactions on the other hand? What new public lines of conflict and alignments are emerging? How are the political camps and societal coalitions changing? Are democracies facing up to these threats from outside, or is democracy failing? These questions are particularly raised by the Russian offensive war against Ukraine and the threat it poses to the security of Europe as a whole. But not only that. Hamas terror against Israel and the subsequent war in Gaza have generated considerable, controversial and aggressive reactions in Western societies. Also, if China were to go to war against Taiwan, not only Germany's economy would not be what it used to be. This would by no means be just a foreign and security policy matter, but it would have huge consequences for society as well. For Germany and German society, these questions are fundamental and raised in ways that is not the case in any other Western country. The wars and conflicts of our time give Germany a role and responsibility which is new to us. For many decades, no one in or outside Germany thought to address or even demand a special foreign and security role for our country, and certainly no one called for German leadership in this field. Simultaneously, a distinct mood of pacifism had established itself in German society and politics over the decades. With Russia's war against Ukraine, both notions have lost their meaning. European security is inconceivable without Germany. Germany has been the most important European country supporting Ukraine and restoring security in Europe. At the same time, a paradigm shift has taken place in German society's attitude towards military security. The vast majority of the population sees Germany's military capability for national and allied defense as a major concern and accepts the necessary expenditures. Germans know what is at stake: security, freedom and peace in Europe, and they know that Germany matters in this respect. Nevertheless, one must not fool oneself. The duration of the current wars is not foreseeable, and the geopolitical systemic conflict with China will probably be the defining global configuration for decades. In such a situation, political leadership is essential, but unfortunately it is currently lacking in Germany and Europe. Extremist and destructive forces, on the other hand, are already agitating against support for Ukraine. This will continue, and that is why signs of fatigue in democratic societies cannot be ruled out. In times when war or peace is at stake, foreign policy has a fateful role. In terms of what is at stake in the individual wars and crises, and for faith in our democracy and its legitimacy. In the political struggles and challenges that lie ahead of us, one thing remains inevitable, especially for Germany. We must respond to the question of who and what we want to be in a time of war and global threats. War is a democratic challenge of a special kind. It is a question of our identity. The task that lies ahead for Germans, Europeans and the West as a whole has historic magnitude. to banish war from Europe once again, to establish a European security order that must extend beyond the previous states of the European Union and NATO, and to hold on to the vision of a European peace order that can only be achieved when a post-imperialist Russia has become part of it. To embrace this historic moral mission goes beyond politics and transcends far beyond the technicalities of military or financial nature. It is a question of our identity, which cannot be delegated to governments, but which we as a society and as a nation must decide democratically. We must decide who and what we want to be as agents of an age in which everything is at stake: security, freedom, and peace. Are we prepared to meet the moment? Because without security, freedom, and peace, nothing else matters.
So you very kindly sent me a PDF of the book, and I had a chance to read through it, and the introduction and the preface that you just read really captures many of the themes and arguments that are developed in some length in the book. And one of them that I think is really quite important is the intersection of international and domestic politics, and your argument, I think, that you carry through the book, that the two are interdependent. And so I suppose where I want to start, I do want to ask you some policy-related questions, but the first one maybe is about the political implications of an external shock to Germany and really, I think, all European democracies, which is Donald Trump's election or re-election. I guess the one question is, will this embolden, I mean, should we expect this to embolden the far right in Germany, across liberal democracies? One of the arguments you make in the book is that because of this interaction, I think, between international and domestic politics, the center is being hollowed out in Germany and elsewhere, and I agree with that. And that strikes me as very clear. And so I suppose one question here is whether Viktor Orban is right that Trump's election will accelerate that process and that hollowing out.
I would say it mainly depends on us. It will have implications, and if we were to sit there quite passively and observe what is going to happen, then we would see, oh yes, this is a big wave, perhaps fundamentally changing in a revolutionary way the democratic institutions and the political style of the leading democracy of the world, which has implications, including that it will embolden those who want to do more or less the same within Europe. On the other hand, we not only must not be, but there is no need to be passive. I would say we have missed so many wake-up calls. 2014, for example, could have been a wake-up call, the annexation of Crimea, the collapse of the European peace order, which we believed in would be an internal order after the reunification of Germany and after Europe had become whole, free, and at peace. And after Vladimir Putin in 2001 proposed in the German Bundestag to build together a European peace order, the European common house, with Russia being a part of this. So this collapsed certainly, and at the latest in 2014. but it did not work as a wake-up call because we stuck to our comfortable ways of ignoring the reality. And even in 2022, when the war broke out on 24 February, of course, a lot has changed, but that Europeans really have assumed our responsibility for our Europe has not been the case so far. But we were quite lucky and happy to see again America playing the role as the most important European security power. So, after the re-election of Donald Trump, and assuming that his policies will be what he has announced during the campaign, this is the ultimate European moment. So it's now our Europe that is at stake. If we do not succeed in banishing war from our continent, war will stay. And we can be quite sure that with the election of Donald Trump, America and American foreign policy does not see any longer, contrary to the foreign policy tradition, or to the tradition of American foreign policy since the time when they entered World War II, does not see any longer European security as a genuine American security interest. So it's left to us, and it should embolden us to live up to our interests and responsibility. My thesis is, if we were to seize the moment, we would embolden and strengthen ourselves and give an example that policy matters, that policy can decide something, that it is in our hands and we make use of our potential and power to impact the direction of our continent, to withstand war, to make this attempt to reintroduce war as a tool of foreign policy in Europe in the 21st century, to bring back the old centuries with war being an instrument of foreign policy, that we make this attempt a failure. So it's up to us how Donald Trump will impact the Europeans. It may even be for the better.
Okay. Well, maybe just to pursue that a little bit, I mean, I suppose, so one puzzle in this is how the threat of war during the Cold War had a kind of, I would say, a disciplining effect on German politics, on Western politics, and certainly American politics, where the far left was marginalized, but also the far right. They basically had no political traction. And we could argue about when that changed. My own view is it changed with the end of the Cold War. But the puzzle is why Russian behavior in 2014 and again in 2022 did not have that same kind of disciplining effect in Germany, in France, I would say in the UK, because populism remains very much alive and has thrived in the wake of it. Right? So it is it's a puzzle.
At least the question goes at the core of why we are behaving the way we do.
Yeah.
I think there is an answer to the question. And the answer is, in the decade of the Cold War, it was really us, for example, the Germans, but also the French and the Brits, who really felt threatened themselves. Germany was a front state. And I recall my grandparents and others saying, if we are not able to defend ourselves, and even if the Social Democrats and so on come into government, then the Russians will be at the River Rhine. So they are immediately there. They felt physically threatened. And to be honest, if we ask ourselves, do we really feel, does the majority of our compatriots in Germany, and go west from Germany to France and Spain and Portugal, do we really feel that this war is about us? Or is it a war in a country that we really don't know well? Most of Germans have never been there, don't know the country. Then there is a buffer country between us, Poland. The Russians are stuck somewhere in the east. Thousands of kilometers they have yet to come. So the main difference is it takes a kind of political, what is this? Abstrahierung? It is abstraction. It's a kind of abstract political argument to say this war is nevertheless about us. It's not that you can't feel it in a comparable physical way. So the Soviets, not the Russians, the Soviet Union, the Warsaw Pact, an entire military alliance is threatening us. This was the East-West conflict. But this is now more complicated. And this constitutes the difference psychologically. That it's not that our reactions to that is not the same, and then it coincides with a different democratic and economic situation. Alongside the threat from the East during the Cold War, there was the economic success story, which of course provided for a high degree of identification, integration, and now we have more or less the other side. We have globalization, which has created huge inequality. A very small minority has gained unimaginably. And then there are many people who feel threatened by this Western globalization, because we have opened up our economies and now we have left major parts or important parts of our industries non-competitive to the competition from China, Asia and other countries. So what I described as that ordinary people see we are not protected, governments are not serving our interests, we feel let down. So this is a mixture of domestic challenges or deficit of legitimacy, and on the other side that you don't feel being threatened immediately, and then you have of course a mixture which is a playground for populists. So the psychological political situation is very different to the Cold War years.
I mean, it's very interesting kind of take. So, on the one hand, people don't feel it's as the threat is as existential as they did during the Cold War.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, they don't feel like the government has their back the way they once did.
Yeah, and it's in America.
I don't mean just Germany.
Yes, it's so Donald Trump says, why should we care about Ukraine? It's not an American matter. And of course there are political parties, both the populist parties, but not only the populist parties. There are also some parts of other parties, and it's even stronger in East Germany than in the West. So we have a deplorable divide between East and West, which is not addressed in our country. How do we see Putin? How do we see this war and so on? And so there is the question: why should we care? Why are we giving billions to Ukraine and our infrastructure is in shatters? So we have to do something for our schools, for our children, for education. There's so much to do in Germany. Why are we throwing out this money to Ukraine?
So, I mean, I guess just to pursue that, the kind of, I think maybe logical implication is that Donald Trump said on the campaign that he needed probably just 24 hours to be able to cover the deal over Ukraine with Putin. All right, let's say it takes 48 hours. So, but that's an exaggeration. But were he able to cut some type of a deal with Putin that awards Russia the territory it currently controls, or it leaves undefined, who maybe not complete sovereignty, but somehow kicks the can down the road over Crimea and so forth, and offers something to Kiev that is short of membership in NATO, but is some commitment, loose commitment to its security going forward, that may appeal. That may be enough. I think that will certainly be enough in the United States. I suppose the question is whether or not that's enough. First of all, whether that's enough for Mr. Putin. I think that's an unanswered question. But whether that's enough for politicians inside Germany.
So if Trump decides to strike a deal with Putin and makes it public, I want to negotiate with him and I want to have a deal.
Yeah.
Then from the start, the West America is in a weaker position than Putin, because once Trump has announced, I'm going to strike a deal, he is dependent to get an outcome. Otherwise, he would be a deal maker who has not been successful. So this is the worst he can imagine of himself. So then the outcome must be, I have to come back with something. And whatever it is, I will sell it, of course, as a big success. But what is in it will be determined by Putin. Because Putin can say from day one, okay, I'm also ready to negotiate and strike a deal.
Right.
But I don't need to. I can continue the war because I'm successful. By the day, I'm taking more ground. So there is no need on my side to come to an agreement. I can pursue my policy of waging war. So if this process were to start, I have very little doubt that it could only be done at the expense of Ukrainian security, which means it could only be done at the expense of European security. In that moment, NATO would not be the same as it used to be, because NATO was invented for European security. If now the leader of the leading country of NATO worked in a way contrary to this ratio of why NATO exists, this would go to the heart and the core of NATO, would lose credibility, it would divide NATO, it would divide the Europeans. Some would applause, not only Orban and others would applause. Germany would be divided, East and West, the parties. I'm not here in any partisan ambition, of course, but I would say there are some parts of the SPD who would say the most important thing is that war ends, irrespective of what the costs or what it means in other terms. But I'm quite sure that Ukraine would be left without having the opportunity to become and develop a viable state, not to exert self-determination. This would be seen in the question of NATO membership, yes or no. So this deal would leave Putin with all opportunities to destabilize, to interfere, to threaten, and to make Ukraine a country with intense infighting, which will occur immediately because Ukraine is a democracy. They will have then democratic elections, big infighting, and there would be too little, far too little foreign investments, because trust in Ukraine as an investment place would not develop. And politically, it would mean both in Europe and beyond, particularly also in Beijing, and how to deal with Taiwan. The lesson is war pays off. War gets rewarded, and war will remain. Moldova will not feel well with that. Even the Baltic countries.
Sure. Poland.
Poland, but the Baltic countries, 2 million inhabitants, small countries. Would they really think we can rely on the United States? Would they go to war, Article 5, if we were attacked or threatened or interfered by Russia in any way? Would they rely? Could they rely on that? So this is the core of NATO, and the core of the West. So this prospect of a deal, I consider this as the worst case scenario we are going to face. And it's even more likely to happen than not.
Yeah.
Which means this is the European
Moment.
moment.
I mean, Donald Trump has been, for anybody who doesn't know, been hammering on NATO for about 30 years. He's been consistent on, I would say, two things politically. Well, three. One is just himself. But one is NATO and the problem, and NATO is ripping the U.S. off and is problematic. And the second is tariffs, which brings me to a question I want to ask.
Yeah.
So if he makes good, and I think we have to take him at his word that maybe it'll only be 10%, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's 20%.
I would say for Britain, 10, due to the special relationship.
I don't think it's so special right now.
Yeah. Yes, it's a kind of self-delusion, which is very prevalent in this country, I suppose. And Europe, of course, at least twice as much.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. Well, I mean, at least you're not in China. So, so let's assume that this happened. And so this is another great challenge for Germany for sure, but I think for the EU more generally. And I suppose just if you could maybe speculate. I mean, the question really is whether or not I think Europe would allow itself to be picked apart by Trump, because I think that's the purpose of this, is to turn this kind of U.S. dealing with a multilateral international entity into single entities where he can leverage America's market power. And whether or not Europe, the EU, can somehow prevent itself from being fragmented in that way. It's kind of a salami tactic, I think, that he will apply. Thoughts?
On trade, so on security, it would be, our response would be necessarily much more intergovernmental. It could be an EU response, because on the one hand there is firstly there is no significant defense competence with the European Union, and on the other side we are not unified, so we would need unanimity, and we don't have unanimity on defense matters. So this would be a matter of intergovernmental cooperation, which is possible and doable. It's a matter of political will. When it comes to trade, the legal and by this the political situation is much different. Europe, the European Union, is a global trade power. There is a single European EU competence for trade, so we are speaking with one voice. The European Union has competences. We are a big market. We are relevant. We can regulate, and we can respond. So we are on an equal footing with the Americans. We do perceive and would perceive embarking on this trade to avoid the term war as a self-weakening of the West. I think there is barely an economic analysis that foresees any benefit on either side of imposing tariffs, of imposing nuclear tariffs.
Mhm.
But we could respond. We would be able to act, and only by this preserve European unity. The interests are, of course, different.
Mhm.
Germany is much more exposed economically and in trade than other countries.
Mhm.
So this might occur and provoke different interests. Nevertheless, there is a body that can speak and decide and has a competence.
So there will be some kind of common denominator
Yeah.
across
Yeah.
Europe, and it will be back. Before I open it up, I have one last maybe question. You mentioned China. I doubt there's anybody in the room here who thinks that U.S.-Chinese relations are going to get better over the next 2 to 4 years. Maybe they will. How does, I mean, if we assume that it remains acrimonious, the relationship, and if Trump's team, given who he's appointing, if they really are able to push towards Asia more programmatically than even Biden, I think, did, Biden's team, I mean, what are the implications for Europe? Where does it plant its flag? Is there a third path, an alternative? Does it? I mean, how does it? I know it's a powerhouse, but these are two.
Yeah, absolutely. No, of course, the China policy and German, European, and American relationship to China is absolutely crucial. My personal assessment is that I would say that Biden's China policy was extremely coherent, consistent, and hawkish, particularly regarding the field of trade. So they really applied economic statecraft in a very consistent way to use economic tools to achieve foreign policy goals. So tariffs, so the famous small yards and high fences of Jake Sullivan, the small yards growing ever more and the fences higher ever more. So this was a very consistent China policy, hitting very hard and being very impactful. I would rather expect Trump to be more the deal maker than the regulator. So let's see and wait how this, whether there is really such a consistent hawkish China policy. We will have to see. However, in any case, also a Harris administration would have squeezed particularly the Germans, because we are crucial also in this respect, to more align our China policy with America. Right. And I would say rightly so. I've criticized the German-China policy for a long time. We have accepted to incur economic dependencies that come along with political dependencies. Major sectors of the German industry has exported their growth concepts to China. But not only the car industry, chemical industries and other sectors. So when if it comes to a conflict or a war against Taiwan, we would not be militarily of an important power, but of course economically, and we would impose sanctions. And everything what we have put into the Chinese basket, and this is a lot of German production and export capacity, would be the potential for counter sanctions against Germany. So we have to reduce dependency. and the Americans will make a change of course in the German-China policy, a significant element for our transatlantic relationship. And I think we should respond to that. Not only respond to that, but we should change our China policy. We should reduce, of course, not ignore China. You can't ignore China. We should trade with China. We should exchange with China, and so on. We should benefit from the relationship, but reduce dependencies. Takes time. And by this, offer the Americans the best we could do is to try to agree on some sort of Western China policy, which should have as one element not only to contain China, to try to constrain China, but also to develop common strengths. Because I would say what matters at the end is not a containment policy against China, but who is stronger in crucial fields, which of course at the end is technology and economy. So who is technologically advanced will also win the competition about political influence, regulation, standard setting, and so on.
Very interesting answer. I could continue this conversation here and pursue that. I spend a lot of time in China, so I find this very interesting. But I want to open it up. I know there must be a lot of questions here. We have roving mics, right? We have one roving mic. So we have to be very patient and disciplined here. Please, well, why don't we start right here? Okay. So please just briefly introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Thank you. My name is Ilma, and I'm coming here as a member of the British-German Society. So I think, as you mentioned, the other societies joined here as well. And thank you very much, both of you, for the conversation and for your foreign policy insight. My question is to you as the former Minister for Environment, as well as the Chair for the Foreign Affairs Committee at Bundestag. So we have COP underway. So basically it's two questions in one. So the first, your reflections on COP, if you've been following, and I'm sure you've been, what's going on and what are the prospects. And the second question, what do you think about the new UK commitments in the budget which were made? I mean, they claim that they're being so green as they've never been, and what is your perception of that? Thank you.
Do you want me to take a...
I would say we take two, but of course, I abide by your rules, of course. So,
I normally take three, so we'll take this gentleman in the
okay,
middle.
so this was COP
Yeah.
29.
You just pass that through, please.
Thank you. Graham Rumley, also member of the British-German Association. I suspect you read yesterday or the day before the news that the Ukrainian National Institute for Strategic Studies had floated the idea that Ukraine should develop a dirty bomb as a possible deterrent to Putin, or indeed to use against either airfields or areas of strategic importance, as A, a way to stop Putin, and B, possibly to get European countries to think about giving them strategic weapons and other tangible support, more so if Trump decides to restrain them. What are your views on that, both the possibility and also the consequences?
Mm-hmm. 2 or 3? 3 you said.
3 is fine. Let's see. Let's go to the back there. You've got your hand up. Yeah, it's kind of you. It's like a tan sweater.
Hi, I'm Konstantin. I'm a student here at LSE, and my question is more on the German perspective. So, you being obviously not really a budget politician, which I understand, but the question is, do you see in perhaps an incoming government with, or perhaps without, with the CDU, do you see a willingness to soften the debt brake for defense spending? Because you said something along the lines of that 2% of defense spending would probably not be enough in the future. So do you see any willingness for that?
So we're going to go, we got climate, we got dirty bombs, and we got
The budget.
The budget. So
It's
international and
domestic. Okay, so on COP29 and the British announcements, I'm quite pessimistic regarding the outcome of COP29 for different reasons. And I see the multilateral climate diplomacy system in a state of crisis. We have not yielded any kind of, in the past years, any kind of result that has really impacted the negative course of CO2 emissions. So we are now on a path to between 2.6 and slightly above 3 degrees increase of temperature. The process has not yielded a commitment, a sufficient commitment of the strongest countries, both in terms of responsibility for emissions and of fiscal and financial capacity. And this is, of course, now going to worsen because the United States will, as we saw in the first Trump period, they will more or less withdraw. So you can debate the withdrawal from Europe and from other areas, but the multilateral system will take a significant toll, as we have experienced in the time between 2016 and 2020. And then you can observe that the United States is an irreplaceable factor and element in the multilateral system. So you see America, having not been very active and being a major contributor to this process even in the past, being withdrawn from this process. You see China being quite active in the area of renewable energy, but as a national security policy. It's mainly a security policy, which is good because it has good ecological effects, but it's not a part of the international process, but it is a national security policy to increase the renewable energy production, and at the same time, of course, ever rising, sticking to a policy because the energy hunger is so big that they also are now even that they remain dependent on the production of coal-produced energy. And the big goal and at the center of this COP29 is an increase of multilateral spending, and this comes after 2 weeks or so after the biodiversity conference has unfortunately been a failure in activating more financial contributions by member states of the protocol. So I think we are not going to see major pledges to increase the annual contribution that goes beyond the 100 billion, which is pledged and given so far. The goal of 500 billion will not be achieved in any way. So what we are going to see more and more is a divide between the so-called global south and others who are not ready and not prepared, given all the other challenges in fiscal terms, to respond in an adequate way. So I think we really have to invent, I would not destroy this track, but we have to invent parallel forms of multilateral cooperation in the field of combating climate change. It's not enough to stick to this instrument, come together annually with 70,000 visitors to this conference. It's a great spectacle for the media, but it does not yield in any way sufficient results. The dirty bomb, I can't assess, I don't know how valid the information is. I also read about it in the newspapers. It would be one of the worst ideas I have read for both Ukraine and the West, and it would only serve Putin's and Russia's interest if alone thinking about that would continue. And the fiscal question, which is rightly put, because the fiscal question is of course crucial, is there. If Europe, for our own interest, has to jump in to fill the American gap, which seems inconceivable, but simply necessary, then of course fiscal capacity is essential and important and crucial. And perhaps to start with one remark, it's telling and a part of the problem that it's only more or less Germany as among the bigger countries, but I would say even others, you can include even others, but let's only stick to the bigger countries, that has left fiscal capacity. So they, to admit frankly in this debate, I've never been a fan of the constitutional establishment of a debt brake, because my view has always been this is a matter of policy, and policy must not be written into the Constitution. The Constitution gives the framework for doing policy, but policy is not an element of the Constitution itself. However, my second confession is against my view. It yielded some benefits, and it has, as a result, the fact that now Germany has fiscal capacity. And this is a result of this constitutional reform we have passed. I'm quite sure that when we get the order of discussion right, we will also solve this problem. And the order of discussion has to be, we have to define the political priorities we commit to and we oblige to fulfill as our main purpose. This might be new for Germany, that we have to sincerely define priorities, which means the difference is it has to end that everything is possible. We have to define priorities because the challenges are so big. And if we then define to restore peace, to restore security in Europe, in a time when America has ceased to see itself as the main security organizer and provider for Europe. Once we have stated this as a priority, inevitable to fulfill, because it is about the very fundamental question of life, of peace and freedom. Then the ensuing questions of fiscal instruments that have to be created and decided upon to fulfill, to enable us to fulfill the purpose, will have a legitimacy nobody can deny. And I would say, if we do not start with a reform of our constitution, but if we were to start is, what are the political purposes that are overwhelming, then I'm absolutely sure that not the CDU would be the party to say, no, we are such strong believers in our fiscal rules that we can't afford to serve peace in our time. So the order of the discussion will be relevant, and I'm very sure that we will find pragmatic solutions once we have done the primary job, which is priorities.
Let's go to another round of questions here. Let's go back here first.
Gentleman over here.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. My name is Casper. I'm a master's student here at the LSE. You've talked quite a bit today about Europe needing to look after itself more. And I just wanted to ask if you have any policies in mind that you would like to see implemented towards that goal. If, for example, you foresee a possibility of greater cooperation in a common European defence and security policy framework?
Other hands? Ladies? Back there. I'll come down here.
Hi, my name is Antonia Fonfado. I'm also a student at the LSE. And my question is, you talked about people in Europe and in Germany, they don't care about Ukraine. They don't really care if Ukraine is gone or not. But why is that? Why is our political messaging not capable of explaining to people? And we sit in a country that also had issue with that regarding other international events, such as obviously Brexit and the EU. Why are we not capable to explain to people what the benefits are of an international liberal world order, what the benefits are for them every day in the European Union? Why is it that that is not clearly expressed? Why is it always this ominous term of this is our freedom? Why are politicians not really making it clear?
And let's come right up here to the front.
Thank you again for the talk. My name is Carla. I'm also just another German student here at the university.
Just.
You said during your talk that Europe, or the West in general, missed many wake-up calls over recent years. But now that the re-election of Trump could be could be emboldening to Europe, and even be something positive, probably in contrast to a Harris win. And I was wondering how that would play out, like, in your opinion, in concrete terms. Thank you.
So perhaps the last question, the first question, are quite can be put together to try to give an answer to these questions. So how could I imagine a European policy in European self-defense, if I may put it that way? My view is, as I already briefly mentioned, my expectation is not that we are going to see a European foreign policy of the European Union supported by 27 member states.
We're not going to see strategic autonomy.
No. So my fundamental view is that we have reached a world where autonomy does not exist, and I feel it a bit embarrassing to call for European autonomy when you see the state of Europe in a situation of our ability and our political will to defend Europe when war has returned to Europe. So I think so the reality speaks the verdict about this rhetoric, I would say. So, but what is possible, and what is necessary and possible is that we seize the European moment. I would do it in more practical terms. If Germany had taken or takes the initiative to bring together East and West, Poland and France, go beyond the EU, so invite Britain and others to express our European will to provide and supply Ukraine in order to enable Ukraine to stop stop military progress of Russia. If Germany were not only to invite and organize a conference, but if we put skin in this game, money on the table, purchasing weapons and ammunition in the international market, start to coordinate our defense industries, start to perceive defense industry not as an instrument of our economic policy to create jobs in our country, but see the purpose of defense industry in defense. And by this we have to create bigger markets in order to achieve higher scales of economic mix in order to be competitive and to reduce the costs. So if we were to start to organize our defense in the short term by buying weapons, in the mid-term and longer term by enhancing our industrial capacities together, this would express a political will, and it would create capabilities. And by this, we would be able to make a difference. The EU is tenfold roundabout, roughly, of the GDP of Russia. We have several of the leading industrial economies, among them leading weapons exporting economies. So it's not about our financial, industrial capabilities, it's all about political will. And it's not because I'm German, but it's simply the result of my analysis. Germany, I do see Germany as inevitable as the instigator of such a process, for different reasons. But if we were to do that, this would be my European way. It is not Germany solves the problem. It's not Germany's leadership, so we are going to do it. But German leadership would mean to instigate, to initiate, to contribute to European leadership. So, yes, so in this role, we are really relevant and not really replaceable. And so this is what was your question? It was
how the Trump election could play out.
So yes, and I would say, so I wouldn't say this is, but without the election of Trump, we perhaps would prefer to muddle through, to rely on the United States. So as always, as in our lifetime, since 45 and 42 or so, it's America who rescued Europe. So they see that they have the capacities. They need Europe to project their global position. And it is our experience. Of course, we contribute something and we have to increase, but we couldn't imagine European security without a decisive American backbone. And this might change. And I would say we should expect this to change. And this forces us to act. Or we surrender. I think this is either we stand up or we give up. I would say there is not much in between. And to the second question, perhaps I was not clear in how I put things. The German population is not the problem, and this is a very positive message, because you can more easily correct politics than the population, and I'm really impressed how the discourse and the mentality in my country has shifted. Before this war broke out, and I've been a member of parliament for quite a time, we had quite a pacifist general mood in Germany. So any kind of military capability or military capability of an integral element of a foreign policy and all these things, there was very little support for this perception of how do we see strength, including the military component, as a part of our foreign policy. And this has changed. So recent polls to the question, should we militarily support, should Germany further militarily support Ukraine? 38%, which is the relatively biggest share of voters and responders, 38% gave the answer, Germany should deliver more weapons to Ukraine than we do. 31% say, no, it's just okay, the amount we are giving to Ukraine, which means roughly 70% are supportive of military supply of Ukraine. Some 25% or so reject at all military support, and the rest is not sure what stance they should take. So to have a 1/4, let's say 30%, I would admit in the East it is 50%, opposition to that, it's normal in a democracy. There have never been 100%. Neither the policy of West integration of Konrad Adenauer in the 50s or the NATO Doppelbeschluss in the late 70s, early 80s, or other political decisions were taken by unanimity. This is not the democratic way we decide. So this has always been controversial, but if you imagine that additionally to this paradigm shift, the German voters were able to listen, I would say at least every 2 or 3 months, to a speech given by the German Chancellor explaining the policy, justifying what we are spending, pointing to the purpose and what it means for us, for which the opportunity does not exist in Germany, because the Chancellor prefers not to speak to his voters regularly. Perhaps we could imagine even a stronger support for this position. But in general, I would say the Zeitenwende has taken root within our society. Not so much, I would say, in all parts of the government, but even, if I may, last sentence, even the majority of parliament, the majority, no, so now collapsed government, but the majority even before was there to support Ukraine in a stronger way, even, for example, to deliver Taurus. It's the position of the CDU, the Greens, remarkably, who entered politics, not politics, but parliament, as the political wing of the peace movement in the early 80s. They are at the center of security policy now, and the liberals. So these 3 parties have a majority in the Bundestag. It didn't play out because governmental orders by the Chancellor were more important than this question, but nevertheless, it represents a majority.
I think we've hit the bewitching hour here. We're actually slightly over. I want to thank you. I think this was, in these very unsettled times, you found a way, it seems to me, of a set of arguments that are, on the one hand, sobering, and on the other hand, provide, I think, reason for hope. And delighted to have been able to chair this and to have you here. Please join me in thanking our speaker for a terrific presentation.